Something was wrong, very wrong. Whispers echoed through the palace halls, aides moved with nervous haste, and behind closed doors, Kate Middleton, the future queen, vanished from public view. No royal statement, no hospital images, no reassurances, just silence. And in that silence, 1,000 questions bloomed. What was happening to Catherine? And more disturbingly, why was no one allowed to know? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, it was subtle. A missed appearance here, a vague excuse there. Aides claimed Kate was resting, taking time for family, adjusting her schedule. But then the weeks stretched longer. Paparazzi combed the streets of Windsor and the countryside near Anmer Hall, but there was no sign of her. She wasn't seen leaving in cars, not even a blurry photograph through the gates, as if she'd been wiped off the royal chessboard in a single move. And no one dared speak of it. Then came the contradictions. One insider hinted at stress. Another whispered about an undisclosed procedure. Meanwhile, a third insisted she was doing well, but couldn't say why she hadn't appeared in over a month. These weren't just conflicting stories, they were strategic diversions. Carefully constructed fog, rolled in to cover something that couldn't be named. And still, the silence deepened. Not just from the palace, but from the media. Outlets that had once trailed Kate's every step now stepped back. Questions were dodged. Journalists suddenly changed topics mid-broadcast. Palace press officers, usually eager to shut down falsehoods, refused to even acknowledge the growing speculation. It wasn't just that they weren't telling the truth, it was that they were actively hiding something. Even the royal family's staunchest defenders noticed the shift. Something had changed. Something they weren't prepared to handle publicly. Inside the palace, tension rose to a breaking point. Crisis meetings reportedly stretched late into the night. Charles was seen arriving at Clarence House 3 hours early. Camilla cancelled a high-profile charity event with no explanation, and yet none of them uttered Kate's name. It was as if invoking her would unleash something they weren't ready to confront. Leaked security footage from Kensington Palace showed Prince William in a rare, unguarded moment, slumped in a chair, hands gripping his face, a silent image of despair. His composure, so often his armor, had cracked. And in that crack, the world caught a glimpse of the weight he was carrying. It wasn't just about illness anymore, it was about control, image, legacy. About what truths the crown could bury without consequence, and which ones might rise from beneath the surface to consume them all. The silence wasn't protection, it was containment. Because, if even a whisper of the truth escaped, the entire institution could be shaken to its core. And still, one haunting question remained unanswered. Who was orchestrating this secrecy? Someone knew, someone always knows. But they weren't talking. Not yet. As speculation turned to panic, the palace's iron curtain began to crack, and the truth they were hiding was far more chilling than anyone imagined. Official timelines told one story, but quiet deletions, altered press schedules, and cancelled appearances painted a much darker narrative. Behind the scenes, a quiet erasure was underway. Someone was scrubbing Kate's presence from the calendar, and those who noticed were silenced fast. The palace, long praised for its precision, began to show cracks beneath the weight of its deception. Public-facing records claimed Catherine had simply taken a brief leave for recovery, but side-by-side comparisons with internal documents revealed something more sinister. Events she was scheduled to attend vanished from digital records. Photographs previously available in press kits were quietly removed. Speeches written for her engagements were never delivered. The gaps were too frequent, too deliberate. A narrative was being rewritten, not in real time, but in reverse. Those responsible weren't just hiding her, they were erasing her. Royal aides, normally chatty with friendly correspondents, fell silent. One staffer known for discreetly texting updates to reporters stopped responding altogether. A source close to Kensington Palace revealed that internal warnings had gone out. No one was to speak to media, not even off the record. Phones were checked, devices were restricted, rooms were swept for bugs. The command was clear: lockdown. It wasn't just about privacy anymore, it was containment. The very air around the royal household shifted, tight with tension, heavy with fear. People weren't protecting a person, they were protecting something far more dangerous, a secret. To a children's hospice weeks before the silence began. At the time, she seemed composed, perhaps slightly withdrawn, but no different from any other royal outing. But now, that footage was re-examined frame by frame. Analysts noted something off in her posture, a stiffness behind the smile, a fleeting wince when she turned to wave. It wasn't definitive, but it was enough to ignite fresh theories. Had the signs been there all along? And if so, why had the palace downplayed it? Every time a journalist tried to probe deeper, they hit a wall. Aides either offered bizarrely vague reassurances, "she's resting," or outright denied knowing anything. When one reporter pressed for a health update, they were abruptly removed from the press pool. Others reported being warned that continued interest in Kate's condition might result in revoked credentials. In a monarchy obsessed with control, this wasn't unusual. But this level of suppression? It was unprecedented. And then came the whistleblower. A mid-level palace employee contacted a trusted royal biographer under the strictest anonymity. What they shared was chilling. The entire household had been placed under what they called internal lockdown. Staff movement was restricted, briefings were curtailed, and even senior advisors were kept out of the loop. The reason given? Medical confidentiality. But the tone suggested something deeper, something everyone feared. But no one dared say aloud. It wasn't the first time the royal family had rewritten history. Palace historians were masters at reshaping timelines to protect the crown. From Princess Margaret's hidden surgery to the secret hospital stays of senior royals, the blueprint for deception had long been in place. But this time, it wasn't just about reputation. It felt like survival. As the erasure continued, so did the questions. And one thing was certain. The tighter the palace tried to seal the truth, the louder the whispers became. But even the most tightly sealed vault can't stop what's coming when the truth claws its way to the surface. There were no flashing lights, no convoys, just a silent car slipping into the back of a private facility under heavy cloak of night. According to leaked dispatch logs, the Duchess wasn't taken to her usual hospital. She was diverted to an off-the-record, high-security medical wing with no public access. Why? It wasn't just the absence of sirens or media frenzy that raised suspicions. It was the calculated silence surrounding the route itself. A single unmarked vehicle left Kensington grounds at 3:27 a.m. Its license plates temporarily obscured, followed by a shadow SUV that peeled off before reaching the M4. This wasn't a routine medical visit. This was extraction. Coordinated, concealed, and ordered at the highest level. A whistleblower from the Royal Protection Squad later confirmed the drop point, a secluded underground entrance known only to military personnel and select royals. The facility? Not a public hospital. Not even a royal ward. It was a military-grade, privately funded medical unit with deep ties to government intelligence networks. For years it had been rumoured to exist, reserved for emergencies the public must never see. This time, it was Kate Middleton they were hiding inside. The secrecy was impenetrable. No patient ID, no official admission. Even the internal logs used code names. When an independent health oversight agent attempted to audit the facility, they were stonewalled with a national security exemption. One insider, however, couldn't stay silent. Speaking through a secure intermediary, they confirmed that not only was Kate brought in through a restricted corridor, but that her name never once appeared on internal records. It was like treating a ghost, the source revealed. No charts, no history, just whispered instructions and total lockdown. We were told if anything leaked, careers and lives would be destroyed. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the complete erasure of surveillance. CCTV footage from the rear gate of the palace, the route along Cromwell Road, and even the entrance to the facility had been wiped clean. Security logs from the transport vehicle mysteriously glitched, recording nothing from the moment Kate stepped inside to the moment she was handed off to the medical team. Digital forensic experts called it surgical, like the entire operation was designed never to exist. And yet, the deeper question remained. What were they trying so hard to erase? Enter Dr. Adrian Falmouth, a name quietly spoken among circles that handled royal crises. Known for his unwavering loyalty and zero-leak reputation, Falmouth had once treated a senior royal under similar clandestine conditions. Now, he was leading Kate's care, operating under strict verbal protocols. No paper trail, no digital records. The only communication allowed? Direct, in-person briefings to the king's inner circle. Falmouth's involvement told insiders two things. Whatever Kate was facing, it wasn't minor. And it wasn't meant to be understood by the public. The staff, too, couldn't ignore what they were witnessing. One nurse, visibly shaken days after the Duchess arrived, was overheard whispering to a colleague, "It wasn't flu, it was something else." That phrase would echo throughout the palace for weeks past in hushed tones, speculated in encrypted chats, and analysed by anyone brave enough to search for the truth. What exactly was so alarming that even Kate's closest friends were left in the dark? Prince William was livid. The man groomed to lead could barely contain his fear, storming into private meetings, demanding transparency only to be met with his father's cold stare and Camilla's eerie silence. When King Charles issued his ultimatum, it wasn't just about Kate, it was about power, control, and what might be exposed if the public found out. Behind the ornate doors of Clarence House, the tension reached a boiling point. William was no longer the polished heir apparent, he was a husband on the verge of breaking, a father shielding his children from questions he couldn't answer, and a man battling an institution designed to suppress emotion in favor of order. His pleas for clarity were met with protocol. His insistence on disclosure was dismissed as emotional instability. And when he pressed too hard, Charles snapped. "You are not the king, and until you are, you will follow orders." It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a threat. A reminder that within the monarchy, even blood has boundaries. At home, the emotional fallout was unbearable. Princess Charlotte had begun asking questions. "Where's Mummy?" she asked one night, her voice barely a whisper. George avoided eye contact. Louis, too young to understand the full scope, had started crying in his sleep. William tried to shield them, but the cracks were impossible to hide. Every morning felt like a performance, every night a lie. The children weren't the only ones suffering. William's private secretary was quietly replaced after expressing concern to a BBC contact. Two other staffers were reassigned after their phones were confiscated. Surveillance tightened. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. William's team, once fiercely loyal, now operated in fear of retaliation. The palace wasn't just watching for leaks, it was hunting them down. Camilla remained silent throughout most of the chaos. But silence, in this case, was not passive. Observers noted her growing presence in strategic meetings, her increasing control over household communications, and her unshakable composure amid the storm. Some believed she was protecting Kate. Others suspected she was positioning herself as the stabilizing force of the monarchy. Whispers grew louder. Was Camilla leveraging the crisis for political gain? If so, to what end? And yet, as Charles dug in his heels and Camilla cast her quiet influence, William was left stranded between duty and despair. He began floating questions no one dared ask. If the monarchy could hide this, what else had they buried? He remembered past family crises quietly covered, conveniently forgotten. Was this just another chapter in that playbook, or had they crossed into something far darker? Tensions escalated so quickly that whispers of abdication began circulating among senior aides. If William refused to toe the line, Could Charles remove him from succession altogether? Was the crown willing to sacrifice its future to preserve its past? That threat, unspoken but felt, loomed over every conversation. And as William paced those ancient halls, surrounded by walls that had witnessed centuries of betrayal and silence, he began to suspect the worst, that his father wasn't just protecting the crown. He was protecting a truth so devastating it could rip the monarchy apart. And just when William thought things couldn't get worse, someone from Kate's past returned with a warning. Folded neatly beneath a stack of private correspondence, it was the last thing Kate ever wrote before vanishing from the public eye. A handwritten letter, its contents never meant to see daylight, surfaced in the hands of someone unexpected. Its message? Cryptic, heartbreaking, and dangerous. The discovery was accidental, or so it seemed. A former staff member, dismissed quietly months earlier, had been instructed to destroy excess correspondence in Kate's private quarters. Most of it was routine thank you cards, brief notes, drafts of speeches, but one envelope stopped them cold. It wasn't addressed, it wasn't sealed, and the handwriting inside was unmistakably Catherine's. Shaking, the former aide read it once, and made a copy before reporting it to no one. That copy now sits at the center of the most chilling chapter in this entire ordeal. The letter was short, barely a page, but what it lacked in length, it made up for in weight. The words dripped with emotion, written in a rushed but steady hand. There were no dates, no names, just a message that made it clear this wasn't an ordinary note, it was a farewell. Or a warning, or both. "I don't know how much longer I'll be safe," it began. "They say I'm overreacting, that I'm tired, but I can feel it, the shift. The eyes, the walls have changed." That first paragraph set the tone. Catherine wasn't just sick, she was scared. She spoke of betrayal without pointing fingers, of being watched without knowing who gave the order. Her words circled around, something never directly naming it, but always hovering. "They want me quiet," she wrote. "Not forever, just long enough, just until the noise dies down." What noise? What truth was on the verge of exploding? Then came the line that changed everything. "If anything happens..." It wasn't just my body failing. It was trust. It was silence, weaponized. The note didn't accuse anyone outright, but in its vagueness, it screamed. Every sentence was loaded with implication. Every pause between the lines dared someone to question what they thought they knew. Most damning of all, perhaps, was what she didn't write. There was no mention of her children, no farewell to William, no trace of finality. It wasn't a goodbye, it was a coded map, written not for mourning but for discovery. When the letter was found, it wasn't shared, it wasn't reported. It was quietly confiscated from the aide's possessions during a so-called routine audit weeks later. Palace sources confirm it never entered official archives, but someone had already made a copy, and that copy found its way into trusted hands. Royal insiders tried to spin it as emotional ramblings, the product of stress or medication, but handwriting analysts, psychological experts, and even palace historians disagreed. This wasn't panic, it was precision. A cry for help dressed as an afterthought. The question that haunted those who read it wasn't just who they were, but whether they had already won. The letter felt like a match, drenched, shivering, flickering but burning just long enough to ignite the edges of a truth too big to hide. And if it had gone unread, forgotten in a drawer or destroyed with the rest, one can only imagine how close the palace came to erasing the final trace of Kate's voice. But the letter wasn't the only thing Kate left behind. Her medical chart told a story that no royal press officer could bury. The files were encrypted, hidden, and locked behind layers of digital firewalls. But they got out. And what they revealed wasn't just a medical condition, it was a ticking time bomb of royal consequence. A rare diagnosis, one linked to a genetic lineage that could unravel more than just Kate's health. It could threaten the throne itself. It started with a breach, subtle, precise, and anonymous. An offshore, server known for whistleblower submissions received a package of documents marked with royal seals and clinical codes. Cybersecurity experts initially dismissed it as a hoax until a single internal metadata tag matched a classified royal health protocol from 2006. The panic was instant. What followed was a scramble not just to contain the files, but to understand the implications before the world did. Within hours, specialists across 3 continents were decoding the language buried in the medical jargon. What they found stunned even the most seasoned analysts. The diagnosis was obscure but devastating. An autoimmune neurological disorder that attacked the central nervous system while mimicking psychological decline. The markers were rare, only present in certain hereditary bloodlines known to interlace across centuries of aristocracy. One line, in particular, led back to a European royal family infamous for concealing illness beneath protocol and myth. The fact that Catherine carried this marker confirmed through covert genomic testing sent shockwaves through those who knew what it meant. This wasn't a random illness. It was inherited, and if publicized, it would spark questions not just about her condition, but about who else in the bloodline might carry the same fatal flaw. The treatment plans within the files were no less alarming. Several charts indicated off-the-record consultations with global experts in immunogenetics and neurodegenerative repair names, typically reserved for experimental cases or state-sanctioned medical trials. One segment referenced something chilling: Project Catherine. But a cross-check with past leaks tied the code name to immunosuppressive containment strategies, treatments that didn't aim to heal, but to halt progression and limit public exposure. In other words, it wasn't about saving Kate, it was about preserving the institution. Some believed the illness could be stabilized long enough for Catherine to resume public duties under tightly managed conditions. Others warned of unpredictable relapses, behavioral shifts, and memory degradation. How could the royal family admit their future queen might carry a condition that questioned the genetic sanctity they'd built their legacy on? How could they allow scrutiny into a bloodline curated to appear infallible? And then came the most damning question of all. Had this been triggered on purpose? One anomaly in the reports raised eyebrows: an abnormal spike in immune response following a routine vaccination. Analysts argued it could be coincidence. Others weren't so sure. A third-party medical entry, redacted and unsigned, referred to external stimuli accelerating latent progression. It was vague. It was buried. But it was there. This wasn't just a health crisis. It was a constitutional fracture disguised as a clinical diagnosis. And in those encrypted pages, the monarchy's greatest fear had come to life, not a scandal, not a betrayal, but a truth that no crown could shield forever. And suddenly, a new name entered the equation. A specialist who once vanished after a scandal involving another royal patient. They told him to stay quiet. They offered money, protection, a peerage even. But Dr. Ezra Linwood, once erased from the Royal Medical Registry, had seen what was happening to Catherine, and he couldn't live with the silence. So he broke the code. And what he said changed everything. Dr. Linwood had been a ghost in the system for nearly a decade, banished from royal service after a controversial diagnosis involving a senior Windsor that was buried so deep even Parliament wasn't briefed. His removal had been swift, ruthless, and unceremonious. No formal charges, no trial, just a quiet revocation of credentials and a whisper campaign that painted him as unstable. But behind the narrative was something far more threatening. A man who had seen too much and refused to play by the rules of royal discretion. His exile had made him cautious, but it hadn't made him forget. So when he was called discreetly, under an alias, to consult on a complex autoimmune case, he knew immediately who it was. He said yes anyway. His visit to the facility was buried in the shadows. No documentation, no signature. He was escorted through a sub-basement corridor by guards who never spoke a word. And there, in a sterile room with lead-lined walls, he saw her, pale, conscious, alert, but diminished. She recognized him. He didn't speak her name. They didn't need to. He wasn't allowed to run tests. He was only asked to observe. What he witnessed, however, was more than enough to unravel the official story. He saw the neuroinflammatory tremors, the suppressed emotional spikes, the off-the-books medication routine that no hospital in the UK had its clearance to use. What troubled him most wasn't the condition, it was the treatment. He later said, "It wasn't about healing her. It was about keeping her manageable." For weeks, Linwood tried to go through the right channels. Quiet appeals to medical boards, anonymous submissions to oversight bodies, encrypted files with redacted logs. But the walls didn't just hold firm, they pushed back. His emails were intercepted, his devices were cloned, his apartment was broken into, though nothing was taken. Then came the discrediting campaign. An old patient complaint suddenly resurfaced in tabloids. Anonymous quotes painted him as bitter, obsessive, paranoid. A leaked voice memo, edited and distorted, suggested he had violated medical ethics. It was a classic takedown, executed with the kind of precision only institutions with unlimited power could achieve. Still, he didn't stop. In an off-the-record interview with an international media consortium, Linwood laid it all out. No names, but enough evidence, enough timelines, enough medical language that couldn't be faked. He choked up during the recording not because of the danger, but because he knew what they were doing to her. She was lucid enough to know she was being hidden. "And that's the worst kind of suffering," he said. His final words in that interview were quiet, but lethal. "This isn't care, this is containment." Within days, Linwood's movements were restricted. An arrest warrant nearly materialized on a decade-old licensing issue, only halted by pressure from a watchdog organization threatening public exposure. But the message was clear. They would silence him if they had to. And still, the damage was done. His testimony had given shape to the rumors. His name, once erased, was now etched into the growing list of those who dared speak the truth. And just when the storm began to break, a single image surfaced that the palace desperately tried to bury. It was only live for 46 seconds, but that's all it took. A grainy photograph uploaded to a private account sent royal watchers into a frenzy. Kate, thin, seated, eyes filled with pain but conscious. A coded gesture, a hidden object in the frame. The image disappeared, but the questions multiplied. The upload came from an obscure account with no followers, no profile image, and a username made of random alphanumeric code. But in the digital age, anonymity doesn't last long. Within seconds, screenshot hunters captured the image and distributed it across encrypted forums. Within minutes, metadata analysts had pulled location tags, and within hours, every major media outlet in the Western world was investigating what many were already calling the image. What stood out wasn't just that the woman in the photograph looked like Kate, it was how unmistakably her it was. The bone structure. The hand gesture she was once known to make at children's charities. Even the faint outline of the engagement ring, barely visible, confirmed what the royal family had tried so desperately to deny. She was alive, alert, and trying to speak without words. But the photo held more than a familiar face. Behind her, blurred but not indistinguishable, sat a framed object long thought to be stored in royal archives, a sapphire brooch known to be Queen Elizabeth's personal favourite, or gifted to Kate privately during a secret Sandringham retreat. It had never been photographed publicly. The fact that it appeared in the shot was no coincidence. It was a message. A breadcrumb, a clue placed intentionally in the background, meant only for those who understood its weight. Analysts began dissecting every inch of the image, from the curvature of her posture to the shadows cast across the floor, searching for patterns, hints, and hidden signals. And one thing became clear: this was not an accident. This was a cry for help, or perhaps a warning. Debate exploded behind palace gates. Some senior aides argued the photo had been digitally manipulated, that it was part of a misinformation campaign. Others quietly admitted the truth. It was real. And worse, the upload had come from inside. Internal digital tracking systems normally used to monitor threats had flagged the source as a palace IP address, routed through a secure Wi-Fi network used only by royal staff. That narrowed the list to fewer than 20 people. All were questioned, none confessed. But the panic was undeniable. If Kate could send messages, if she had access to objects carefully hidden away, then the containment strategy had failed. And if she had allies within the system, the entire strategy could collapse. The media, sensing blood, began circling. Rumors turned into headlines. The palace, in a rare move, issued a statement within hours. But it was cold, mechanical, and devoid of substance. No confirmation, no denial, just a thinly veiled warning that unverified materials should not be interpreted as fact. But the public wasn't interested in the palace's caution. They had seen something undeniable, and they wanted answers. Behind the scenes, power struggles reignited. Charles' inner circle debated whether to double down on the silence or pivot to a controlled reveal. William, reportedly furious that the image had surfaced without his knowledge, demanded to see the original file. Camilla, notably absent from all crisis discussions that week, remained uncharacteristically quiet. And through it all, the one person everyone wanted to hear from the woman in the photo remained out of reach. With pressure mounting and the truth seeping through the cracks, the monarchy had no choice but to face the world. The palace finally spoke. But not all truths were revealed. What the world saw was a carefully crafted image, a fragile Catherine smiling through pain. But the real story, the manipulation, the cover-ups, the diagnosis that still hangs like a sword above the monarchy, remains buried under layers of royal protocol. For now, the statement was brief, calculated, and devoid of accountability. In less than 90 seconds, a spokesperson cited Catherine's ongoing recovery, thanked the public for their patience and understanding, and reiterated the family's desire for privacy during this sensitive time. There was no mention of the leaked photo, no acknowledgement of the medical files, no answer to why so much had been hidden for so long. The words were wrapped in soft tones, but their intention was clear: deflect, dismiss, and diffuse. And for some, it worked. But for millions more, it only raised louder, sharper questions. The video appearance came next, a grainy, overly lit recording of Kate speaking from what appeared to be a study. Her voice was steady but detached, her smile too rehearsed, her tone eerily formal. She spoke of gratitude, resilience, the journey ahead. But there were cuts, edits, and in one frame, a faint tremor in her hand. Analysts dissected it for days. Experts in body language noted micro-expressions of discomfort. Lip readers caught moments where her mouth moved but the audio didn't sync. It was polished and hollow. The public saw a woman wrapped in royal messaging, not a wife or mother fighting for her health. And for many, that was the final blow. In the hours following the release, major media outlets flooded the airwaves with commentary. Palace-aligned reporters lauded her courage. Government officials tweeted support. Morning shows played the clip on loop, dissecting her every word. But alternative voices told a different story. Whistleblower accounts resurfaced. Independent journalists highlighted the inconsistencies. Digital sleuths drew direct lines between the photo, the files, and the forced reveal. The divide between narrative and reality had never been wider. William re-emerged for a walkabout in Bristol just 2 days later. The press framed it as a return to duty, a show of strength. But those who looked closely saw something else entirely. He was pale. His eyes were sunken. And for the first time in his public life, his expressions betrayed him. Gone was the composed statesman. In his place stood a man visibly haunted by everything he couldn't say. A man still caught between loyalty to his crown and loyalty to the woman he loved. The public, once docile in their reverence for tradition, began to fracture. Polls showed a sharp decline in trust toward royal communications. Hashtags demanding transparency trended globally. Even long-standing royalists began to admit something was deeply wrong. Not just with Kate's story, but with the very machinery designed to obscure it. And then came the final, chilling question. If this was what they were willing to show, what had they kept hidden? If this carefully curated reveal was the palace's version of honesty, how much darker was the truth? And perhaps more importantly, was this really the end of the ordeal, or merely the beginning of a new one? And in the shadows of royal tradition, the real war over truth, power, and legacy continues quiet, ruthless, and far from over. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.